300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malcolm with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me on this Wednesday morning. Jam-packed, lot to talk about, some breaking news in the world of tennis I'm going to touch on, as well as some interesting headlines in the NBA, and I'm also going to be previewing the Sweet 16, the NCAA tournament continues to roll on starting tomorrow. I cannot wait to see all of that unfold. But I have to start with news that was a bit of a bombshell in the world of tennis yesterday. The number 1 ranked women's player, female player in the world, Ash Barty, the number 1 overall player in the world on the women's side, Ash Barty, officially announced her retirement from the sport of tennis at the age of 25. She says that she, in a 6-minute Instagram video yesterday, she posted that she was really happy with her decision and that she has other dreams that she wants to chase. And it's time for her to put her rackets down. She felt like the time was now. She was ready to make this decision. It's been a decision that's been lingering over her for quite some time. And she officially called it a quits yesterday. And the big thing for her, and she laid this out in this video, was winning Wimbledon was her number 1 true goal when she became a pro. And once she accomplished that, there was a certain burden that was lifted off her shoulders, where she felt she's accomplished this major feat. Now, at the time when she won Wimbledon, which was her 2nd overall Grand Slam, she's won 3. She obviously won the 2022 Australian Open Australian Open just a couple months ago in January. She won the French Open in 2019, and she won Wimbledon in 2021. But as much as she thought Wimbledon was going to kind of satisfy that personal goal for her, it didn't satisfy it enough until she won the Australian Open in 2022. And we obviously haven't seen her play in many matches since then. She's kind of not participated in a lot of the tournaments post the Australian Open 2022. So she's already won 3 Grand Slams at the age of 25. I laid those 3 out. When she turned pro in 2010, so when she was literally a 13-year-old is when she first joined the junior competition level. That's when she started her career. She's won 15 singles titles, 12 doubles titles in different tournaments over the course of her career. She spent 121 weeks as the number 1 ranked player in the world, including the last 114 consecutive weeks as the top female player in the world. And even just a couple months ago, she recently announced her engagement to a professional golf trainee, Gary Kissick, his name, in November, which was leading up to the Australian Open. So a lot of her personal and professional goals had been satisfied. But I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't shocking and this wasn't absolutely stunning, because it was. Now, I will say I'm a little bit dubious that she's fully retiring from the game and not just taking perhaps a 2-year hiatus, because she's done this before. Back in 2011, when she was just a junior competing, that's when she kind of got started on the tour in 2011 at age 15. She left the tour for nearly 2 years in 2014 because she was just burnt out, overwhelmed by the pressure and the stress of having to perform time and time again. And then when she returned home during that brief hiatus, she joined the Australian cricket team and eventually played enough cricket competitively led her back to the tennis court. She picked up a racket, and obviously we know what she's been doing ever since that time. And so we've seen athletes kind of renege on their retirements in the past. We've seen Michael Jordan do it after he won 3 titles with the Bulls in 1993, stepped away for 2 years, came back, won 3 more. Tom Brady most recently just reneged on his retirement, but he's 41 years old. But the thing about her that makes this really interesting is the sport that she's playing and the type of player that she is. She's a very savvy player. One of the things that I've talked about whenever I've watched Ash Barty is how clever and savvy she is as a player. Obviously, her forehand and her ground strokes have always been tremendous, but her forehand's been powerful, but it's been her slice on her backhand that she could manipulate points with that's allowed her to operate so methodically and so different and unique from her contemporaries. Most people can't move you around the court with their backhand slice. With their backhand, yes. With a backhand slice, it's very difficult to do. And Ash Barty has been one of the few players in the history of the game that's managed to control points and dominate points using that slice and then allowing herself to buy time to create that window of opportunity with her forehand to crush a shot cross court or down the line. But I think even more importantly than who she's been as a player, how she's conducted herself, the way that she's represented herself on the court is second to none. She has always shown a tremendous amount of class, very stoic after points for the most part, doesn't show much emotion, but the way that she respects her opponents, the grace that she shows, she's super calm, super collected. She's been very unique. Doesn't ever belt that often after big points. Maybe gives herself a small fist pump, but that's about the extent of it. And she's been one of the great ambassadors of the sport. And in a lot of ways, I would say one of the more recent torchbearers of the sport. And it's a blow to tennis that we're not going to see her. And I think it's going to be really difficult for us, and especially myself, to envision what she's going to be doing after tennis. It's almost like when Kobe retired in the NBA, it took a minute to get used to seeing him pour himself fully into children's storytelling. It took a minute for that to sink in. And what also makes this particularly interesting is we've actually seen this before in the sport of tennis specifically. And I'll highlight a couple of the reasons why in just a moment. But you think about some of the greatest tennis players who have ever played. Bjorn Borg, perfect example of a guy who would have been a generational player. The Swedish guy retired at the age of 26. He had won 11 Grand Slams at that point. Kind of officially retired in 1983. Tried to come back briefly in 1991. Didn't make much noise. Officially retired again in 1993. He was just kind of burnt out, lost the joy that he once had for the game. Justine Henin, fantastic Belgian tennis player. She won 7 Grand Slams. At one point, spent 61 weeks as the top ranked female in the world. She was number one in the world in May of 2008 when she retired, but she just lost the joy. She was burnt out. She was overspent. And that's oftentimes what you see from these tennis players, is that losing of a desire to continue to train the way that you train every single day. And obviously we've seen other athletes in their prime retire. Now, certain athletes, like as I mentioned, Michael Jordan, he briefly retired once in his early 30s when he had just turned 31, right? We've seen Bo Jackson. He retired at 31 in the 1980s. Earl Campbell retired after some incredible 6 years in the NFL. He was a Pro Bowler 5 of the first 6 seasons in the NFL, retired at age 31. Jim Brown retired at the age of 30. He had just come off an MVP season in 1965 for the Browns when he retired. Floyd Mayweather, we saw, kind of wavered back and forth, but he announced his official retirement at the time after he defeated Oscar De La Hoya at the age of 30. We saw Sandy Koufax, of course, with the Dodgers. He retired at the age of 30. He was coming off a season with his lowest ERA in the history of his professional career. He had already won 4 World Series at that point, and he announced his retirement. Now, all of those guys announced their retirements post the age of 30. There are just a handful of examples of athletes that announced their retirements in their 20s, and that's what makes this unique. But Ash Barty's 25. You think about some of the more recent ones. Andrew Luck in the NFL, he was 29 when he retired. Gale Sayers, former running back of the Chicago Bulls, announced his retirement when he was 28. Perhaps the most notable one, most people don't even know of, is Mark Spitz, who was the Mike Phelps before the Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer. Between the 1968 and 1972 Olympics, he captured 9 gold medals in that time frame. And he retired at the age of 22. And then tried to come back about 2 decades later, and obviously that didn't work out. But the difference is, some of these athletes that I mentioned can be grouped and clustered together with Ash Barty. The difference is Ash Barty was number 1 in the world, not just like a top 10 player, the number 1 player in the world. And obviously some of these athletes were dealing with chronic injuries that derailed their careers, and the comeback just was too grueling. And Ash Barty is managing to leave injury free. But the one thing that I do know about tennis, because I've been playing a long time, and to get to even a college level, which I had received scholarships to play in college, so I understand to a certain degree what it takes to play collegiately. And I've got other friends who play Division I who are trying to make it on the tour. The one thing I know about tennis is to be great at that level, it is such a grind, because it is a completely solitary sport. It's an individual sport. You're training by yourself. You're constantly on the road. Maybe you have a coach, a small team that you're traveling with, but you're not training with many other pros. It's just hours and hours of you by yourself on the court. And even when you're playing with someone, it's not like you're playing a team sport where it's 5v5 or 11 on 11. It's 1v1. So your interactions with other athletes are minimal. You're training by yourself. Even if you are Ash Barty and you're the number 1 player in the world and your accommodations are top of the line wherever you go, you're still by yourself. You're traveling on the road for months on end, just you and maybe your small team. That's about it. So it can be physically and emotionally draining, which is something that she noted. It was physically and emotionally draining and taxing. And again, I can speak to it to some degree. Practicing tennis by yourself, it's just you're playing with one person. It gets a bit repetitive, and it's exhausting, it's taxing, and have to be doing that for years on end. The fact that she turned pro in 2010 when she was 13, You have to imagine all of the practices that she put in before that just to get to that point. So this is a major blow to women's tennis, because I was just complimenting Iga Swiatek a couple days ago for winning the Indian Wells tournament, because she was one of the newer up-and-coming female tennis players that was starting to show a little bit more consistency at the top of the level, and starting to etch her name into that consistent group of women like Ash Barty, like Serena Williams, like Naomi Osaka for a brief stretch for about 4 years. Ash Barty had been the number one women's player in the world for a good stretch, and Iga Swiatek obviously wasn't showing that kind of dominance, but she was starting to kind of become a little bit more consistent. Now it's just going to become a musical chairs of who's going to win these tournament events. It's like driving on the 405 in LA during COVID. It's completely open, completely free to drive here. It's a wild, wild west. So it's going to be up for the taking to see who's actually going to grab the mantle from her from now on, because a bunch of players have had their moments. It's a blow because you lose again a little bit of stability at the top with Ash Barty no longer playing. So on a personal level, I'm obviously happy that she's happy with the decision. That's the most important thing. It's been a true privilege to see her play over the course of her career. She's elevated the sport, she's elevated the game, and we're going to miss her dearly. Now, would I be surprised if in 2 years or 3 years from now she tries to make a return? No, I would not. She's 25 years old, so even if she did decide to take several years off, she would still be in her 20s trying to make a comeback. Unlike some of these other athletes who waited till they were in their 30s, she'd be in her 20s, which is a lot more doable in that instance at that age. But so so a small portion of me is a little dubious, just like we just saw Tom Brady unretire a couple weeks ago. I wouldn't be entirely shocked if Ash Barty did it, but for the moment and the present, it's a bombshell in women's tennis. It's a bombshell in women's tennis, and I wish her nothing but the best. But again, she's been an absolutely fantastic ambassador of the sport, and a fantastic player. Really, really fantastic player. It's been a pleasure to watch her perform. So I want to transition to the NBA. An interesting story continuing to develop in the NBA. Zion Williamson and the New Orleans Pelicans. Part 6, it seems like, of the saga continues. Yesterday, Zion Williamson posted a video of him executing a between-the-legs dunk amid his supposed to be ongoing foot rehab. Now, I don't know about you, if you've ever recovered from a foot injury or rehabbing a foot injury. Normally, if you are still injured or even recovering, I don't know, jumping high and coming down on your foot probably isn't the best idea. I'm assuming your doctor would probably not recommend doing that if you were truly hurt at the moment, if you truly couldn't come back and play. So I was a little bit torn when I saw this video, because obviously he's been away from the team the majority of the season, just came back a couple weeks ago. He rejoined the team. And he had undergone a second foot surgery. He had suffered numerous setbacks over the course of the season. He was rehabbing in Portland. Then he came back. And according to local media outlets, they've said that the Pelicans have kind of been limiting the amount of run he's getting. He's only attempting shots. He's getting up a few shots. He's done just light shooting without jumping with his player development coaches, is what it says from the New Orleans media. So I'm torn on this, because on the one hand, I'm thrilled to see him back and playing, at least showing off the explosiveness and the athleticism. So I'm thrilled to see he still retains that. And he looked a lot slimmer in the video versus what we saw from those first couple of photos early in the season, where the guy looked like Hulk. But I also don't love this because it's sending mixed messages here. There's mixed signals that are being sent, because this makes me think, well, it seems like he could be ready to go pretty soon, like he's on the road to recovery. And obviously the Pelicans organization just came out a couple days ago and announced that he's officially done for the season. And now he posts a couple days later him dunking this photo. So clearly those two parties are not along the same wavelength. Maybe he wants to come back. I don't know. I love Zion. I love the way he was playing. I've defended him for the majority of his career. I said I would take him barely ahead of Ja Morant. Now, obviously, Ja is showing greater amounts of leadership at the moment than Zion Williamson. But when he's been on the floor, he's been absolutely scary. He's been scary efficient, shooting at about 60%. He's been a monster when he's been out there. And I have no doubt that had he been available the whole season, or had he made a full recovery this year and played, he would have been just as productive as Ja Morant. I do believe that to be the case. But I also didn't like the way he's been acting the last couple months, where he's distanced himself from the team. He was peer pressured by the media, even into having to reach out to CJ McCollum. I didn't like that. He didn't reach out to him right away, had to be coerced into doing that. I don't love that. From an optics standpoint, that's not great. And there just seems to be some disconnect between the Pelicans and Zion Williamson, what they want, what he wants. So I think he wants to come back and play. But then it's interesting because for the first half of the season, it seemed like he wanted nothing to do with the Pelicans. In the first half of the season, the Pelicans wanted everything to do with Zion. They wanted him to come back. And now the last couple months, they're trying to shut him down repeatedly. And it feels like they're going against the grain with him. So I understand why they're shutting him down. And he's only played in 85 games in 3 seasons. So it makes perfect sense that they're trying to preserve his health. They're trying to get him to fully recover. But this is a Pelicans team that is in the play-in tournament at the moment. They're the 10th seed. And with a Zion Williamson, they could be a scary out. They could start to apply some pressure to some teams. I think they could be a force a little bit. The way that CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram have been playing, I'd be fascinated to see Zion Williamson. So part of me is like, damn, what are we doing here? Like, what is going on? And I understand it from both angles. Both sides have their reasons. There's only 2 weeks left in the regular season. So does it make the most sense to bring him back now? On the one hand, you could say probably not. On the other hand, why not? So I just don't really know what they're doing. I don't really know what they're doing, and it's perplexing to me. But I was mixed about seeing that video. I really was. And finally, sticking with the NBA, before I preview the Sweet 16 matchups, I did want to talk about another NBA team. So the Atlanta Hawks and the New York Knicks wrapped up their regular season series yesterday at the Garden. Trae Young was phenomenal. Hawks ended up beating the Knicks 117-111. And obviously, every time you see these two teams match up, you think about the first round playoff matchup last season that the Atlanta Hawks ended up winning in 5 games, right? It's almost hard to fathom those were the two teams in the first round of the playoffs last year. The Knicks were the 4 seed. The Atlanta Hawks were the 5th seed. And now we're seeing a huge disappointment from both of these sides this year. Now, let me first start with the New York Knicks in this respect, because I do want to talk about the Atlanta Hawks, but let me say this about the Knicks. I think that obviously we've all been disappointed in the New York Knicks, but to some degree, this isn't completely shocking, because what was shocking was them making the postseason and having the type of run that they did last year. Last year, no one expected the New York Knicks to make the postseason. No one expected that. So the fact that they went on that tear, the fact that they had bought in fully into Tom Thibodeau, They were defending at an extremely high level. The fact that Julius Randle was playing like an all-star, all-guard, all NBA type of player was a bit mind-boggling. So the fact that the team as a whole has kind of cratered back to reality isn't completely shocking this season why they've been struggling, because currently they're like 12th in the Eastern Conference right now. And Julius Randle, he's still been good. Listen, the guy's still averaging 20 points and 10 rebounds. So he's solidified his standing as a legitimate starter in the NBA, as a borderline all-star, sometimes an all-star depending on the season type of player. He's a bona fide kind of starter for sure. Is he the face of your franchise? No, he's not. Not to take away from him. There are just a handful of guys that are, but that's part of the reality. RJ Barrett, I love the way he's been playing. He's playing with a lot of confidence. He's not afraid of the moment. And the other thing about RJ Barrett that I think people misconstrue about him is they look at all the shot attempts and all they think about is, oh, this is someone who's probably selfish, just trying to jack up a lot of shots. I view it as less about that, and he's not afraid of the moment. He's got that killer mentality, and he's trying to elevate his game. He wants to be fearless. We've seen a bunch of games like that where he scored like 30 points in the first half against the Miami Heat in a road game. He's showing that promise. But okay, so he needs a little bit more help. Emmanuel quickly, he's had his moments, just not consistent enough, hasn't popped enough. Evan Fournier, God bless Evan Fournier. 4 years, $73 million. What a job he did. What a ploy he did to land himself that contract. Note to self, play really well in international basketball against Team USA, and I'll land myself a multi-million-dollar contract. The guy looked like a superstar in France, this unbelievable closer and player. He was hitting tough turnarounds, spinning one-legged fadeaways against Team USA, and now with the Knicks, he is just average. But, hey, all the power to Evan Fournier. Good for him for locking up that type of contract. I'm sad for Derrick Rose and for Kemba Walker. I'm sad for Derrick Rose that he hasn't been able to play much this year. I'm sad that Kemba Walker is dealing with chronic knee injuries. It's a shame, but that is what it is. But all of that made a little bit more sense to me. The team that surprised me has been the Atlanta Hawks because, yes, no one expected the Atlanta Hawks to go back to the Eastern Conference Finals. No one expected them to be the Eastern Conference Finals Atlanta Hawks good this year. But with that being said, no one expected them to be 10th in the Eastern Conference either. Right now, they're 10th in the Eastern Conference, 36-36 overall record. And they're behind a couple teams that it's just surprising given the personnel that they have on this team. Now, the reason, because I took a deeper dive into the Atlanta Hawks, because it shocked me why they've been playing the way that they've been playing. So the first glaring difference between this year and last year, they don't defend this year. They're 22nd in the NBA in points allowed versus, which isn't an atrocity. It's pretty bad. It's not good, obviously. Last year, they were 12th in the NBA in points allowed, which was substantially better. They were kind of an underratedly good defensive team last year. They flew around. They contested a lot of shots. They've had length. And you look at the roster, and this year, they're allowing opponents to shoot 47% from the floor. So nearly 50% of the time an opponent shoots a shot, it's going in. You're obviously not going to win games that way. That's worse than the Lakers, who is kind of the most apt comparison to the Atlanta Hawks right now, just barely treading water to stay alive in the play-in tournament. And you look at this roster, and you've got Trae Young, you've got John Collins, you've got Clint Capella, you've got a healthy DeAndre Hunter back, you've got Kevin Huerter, you got Danilo Gallinari, you have Lou Williams, you have Gorgie Jang anchoring defensively off your bench. You've got a pretty good team. I like Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot. I actually think he provides some good depth. And when you think back to those Atlanta Hawks from a season ago, the reason why they were so special was because Trae Young turned into a superstar in the postseason, and they had a lot more depth than most other teams. So they had a lot of scoring punch off the bench that they could turn to in the postseason. And Trae Young is still individually fantastic this year, 28 points, 9.5 assists, 4 rebounds per game, 45.5% field goal percentage. Maybe could be a touch higher, but I'm not going to kill the guy for it. 38% from three, 90% from the free throw line. He's doing his part. The problem is they started 4-9. They got off to a terrible start. They were 17-25 midway through the season by the first half mark. And they've been trying to climb uphill ever since. They've been riding the Stairmasters, trying to get back up to 500 for about the last 30 games. So the problem is, if they were in the Eastern Conference last year, perhaps they're able to make that jump a little bit quicker, but it's a lot deeper this year. It's a hornet's nest this year in the Eastern Conference. That's just the reality. So you're not going to just climb up and usurp guys in front of you. It's not going to happen. They're too deep in the Eastern Conference this year. And that's why I wanted to compare the Hawks to some other teams, is because it's a little perplexing when you compare their roster to certain rosters, like the Cleveland Cavaliers, 6th in the NBA in the Eastern Conference in the standings. Now, the difference is the Cavaliers are a top 3 defensive team in the league. So that's allowed them to win games. You look at the personnel, though, Colin Sexton is out. So he was supposed to be ostensibly their best player coming into this year. Darius Garland is playing really well. He turned himself into an all-star. Obviously, Evan Mobley is one of the front runners for Rookie of the Year, might be the front runner for Rookie of the Year. He's been playing really well. Jared Allen has been playing exceptionally well. You have Karis LeVert, who joined the team mid-season, but he's been in and out of the lineup. Kevin Love, who's older. So that's who kind of makes up the Cleveland Cavaliers for the most part. Obviously, Jetty Osman coming off the bench. There's some other guys off the bench, but is that really better than the Atlanta Hawks roster to me? No, but they play defense. That's been the difference. They play defense. Same thing with the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors starting 5 is very good. It is very good. Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, who's been fantastic. Another sure to be vote getter for Rookie of the Year. Fred VanVleet, who's been an all-star. OG Anunoby has been playing really, really well. And Gary Trent Jr., of course, has had some explosive performances this year, multiple 30-point games for Gary Trent Jr. That trade for Powell and Gary Trent Jr. with the Portland Trailblazers has worked out beautifully for them. So their starting 5 is formidable, but they don't have much of a bench. But Nick Nurse gets them playing hard defensively, and they're a much more efficient team in the half court than the Hawks are. But again, you look at personnel, and you're saying, I don't really understand why the Hawks can't be better than this team record-wise, but they are. Same thing with the Charlotte Hornets, who are ahead of them right now in the 7th spot. I absolutely love LaMelo Ball. I love LaMelo Ball. Miles Bridges is in the running for most improved player in the NBA. Obviously, they still have Scary Terry Rozier. Gordon Hayward, he is a part of the team, but he's missed about a third of the games with an injury. And Kelly Oubre is decent. He's decent. But then you look on the bench, they've got P.J. Washington, Mason Plumlee, Montrezl Harrell. Nice pieces, but not necessarily a great roster. So the Hawks should be better. They should be a 6 or a 7 seed in the Eastern Conference, but they're not, because they're not defending. For whatever reason, they're not quite as connected. Nate McMillan doesn't have them playing quite as together this year. And I'm not going to blame it or heap all the blame on Nate McMillan, because the job that he did last year to turn around that franchise when they were struggling below 500 was phenomenal. And their second half run was probably the best second half run by a team in the NBA last year. But this year they started off slowly. They seem to be more about individual stats as opposed to collective achievements. And for whatever reason, there's just been a lack of cohesion on the team this year. And I think it started off because there was confusion about players' roles. They had too many guys playing the same position. Cam Reddish was trying to play the same position as Kevin Huerter. DeAndre Hunter was coming back. One of those guys had to go. They got rid of Cam Reddish. They had a lot of shooters on the team, a lot of scorers on the team. And sometimes every season presents its own challenges. And for whatever reason this year, They just haven't had the same unity. And that's kind of been the difference. So it's been shocking how they've struggled so much this year. They're in the play and they're hanging on for dear life in the 10th spot. I'd love to see them scoot up a little bit because I'd like to see them actually in the playoffs. I'd like to see Trae Young in the playoffs. So we'll have to wait and see. Okay, final topic of the day. So starting tomorrow, the NCAA tournament continues. The women's also continues, but the men's bracket continues tomorrow. And it's the Sweet 16, first day of the Sweet 16. So we are one weekend already in the books. And there have been, tons of upsets already heading into the Sweet 16. Now I wanted to take a closer look at the Sweet 16 matchups and analyze those matchups and see if there are any potential upsets along the way, because I'm sure there will be. And so let's break down all these matchups really quickly. So the first matchup, Gonzaga and Arkansas. First of all, yes, it would technically be an upset if Arkansas was to beat Gonzaga. Gonzaga finishes the number 1 overall seed in the tournament, in the rankings, during the last final rankings. Arkansas was a top 20 team in the nation anyway, so they're a good team. I think the problem that Arkansas is going to have with Gonzaga, which is why I don't see them winning, is they're a very guard-centric team, Arkansas, and that's really tough. It's tough for guards to take over against Gonzaga with their length on the perimeter. Normally, the teams that beat Gonzaga are the teams that have height, the teams that have big guys, whether they're traditional bigs, whether they're stretch forwards. Those are the types of players that play physically with Gonzaga. Those are the types of teams like a Memphis that can pose some problems for them. So I don't see Arkansas winning this game. So I'm not going to predict an upset there. I'm going to have Gonzaga winning. Now, obviously, St. Peter's and the Peacocks, the run that they've had, every single win that they've had has been an amazing comeback, has been an amazing upset. I love the confidence and the swagger that they play with. Shout out to the one kid, Eater. Apologies. The 3-point guy with the mustache. I forget his name. He already signed a new NIL deal with Buffalo Wild Wings. I saw got posted. So congrats to him. They're maximizing this tournament run. They obviously knocked off Kentucky, then Murray State. This is a little bit of a different team in Purdue. They've got a bona fide superstar on that team in Jaden Ivey. They're really well coached. I don't see them beating Purdue. I love Shaheen Holloway is making a case to land a bigger job next season. So good for him. But Doug Eater. I was just thinking about his name. All the memes about Doug. Shout out to those guys. But they've had a fantastic season. I don't expect that run to continue, so I'm not going to predict an upset in that Sweet 16 matchup. UNC and UCLA, there's no question that if North Carolina was to beat UCLA, it would be an upset. But I do think UCLA is a 4 seed, North Carolina is an 8 seed. These are 2 storied programs in college basketball. So I think whenever anyone hears North Carolina in the NCAA tournament, are they really going to be that surprised? Now, I know Roy Williams isn't the head coach anymore, but this is still a blue blood program in North Carolina. And the way that we saw them dismantle Duke in Coach K's final game at Cameron Indoor, and the way that they beat down Baylor and were dominating them before their best player fouled out. Yes, it would be an upset. I wouldn't consider it a huge upset. I also don't necessarily see it happening. It could happen. But I like UCLA's experience a little bit more in this spot. But regardless, I wouldn't consider that a huge upset, an 8 seed over a 4 seed, personally. Then we have 11 seed Iowa State, 10 seed Miami. Neither of those matchups, I think, would be viewed as an upset. Miami is scary right now. They look fantastic. The way that they've been playing, extremely confident. Jim Larinaga has always performed well in the tournament. He always gets his teams to perform well in the tournament. So both of those 2 teams are on an incredible ride this year. One of them is going to punch their ticket into the Elite 8, and it would be a monumentous moment for both of those schools and those programs. Providence and Kansas, that could be an upset. That could be an upset because I like Al Durham. I like Bynum for Providence. I love their head coach. This is a Providence Friars team that doesn't get a lot of attention, and that would be an upset if they were to knock off number one Kansas in the Big 12. And Kansas isn't the same number one Kansas type of team that we've seen from Bill Self. Ochai Agbaji is a great player. He's having a tremendous season, but I don't necessarily know if this is the most dominant number one seed. Now, I actually think this game will be really close. And to be honest, I didn't even have Kansas in my Elite Eight. I had them in the Elite Eight. I had them in the Elite Eight, losing to an Auburn team that obviously lost, and even a Wisconsin team that lost earlier. But don't even get me started about Wisconsin. I emotionally can't handle talking about my Wisconsin Badgers today. It is what it is. You shoot 2 for 23 from the 3-point line in Milwaukee when you're from Wisconsin. It is what it is. It is what it is. But so I have Kansas beating Providence, but that obviously would be an upset. But I still don't see it happening, even though Providence is really well coached and it's going to be a competitive game. I don't see it necessarily happening. Houston and Arizona, I'm a little bit worried for Arizona. The way that TCU pushed them, I still have the Wildcats reaching the finals, the championship game. And I love Matherin, Koloko. This is a really good Arizona team. But this is also a Houston team that they kind of they didn't deserve to be a 5 seed, to put it bluntly. They finished as a top 15 team in the nation in the final rankings. This should have been probably a 3 or 4 seed in the tournament. So the fact that they were a 5 seed was a bit of a snub to them. And so that's why I wouldn't view that as a huge upset if they were to win. Now, again, I don't see it happening. I see Arizona winning. But even if Houston did win, I look at it less as a 5 seed over a 1 seed and more, okay, maybe the 13th ranked team over the 2nd ranked team in the nation. And that's kind of how you have to look at it. And from that perspective, yes, it would be an upset. It wouldn't be a huge upset, in my opinion, but I also don't see it happening. I see Arizona winning. Texas Tech 3 seed, number 2 seed Duke. No upsets there. If Texas Tech wins, great. I have Duke beating Texas Tech, but the physicality that Texas Tech plays with, I wouldn't be surprised if they were to win. But again, I wouldn't view that as an upset because that can be the difference between 1 or 2 spots in the seeding. So they're pretty evenly matched. Here's where I do see an upset. And I'm concerned about Villanova against number 11 Michigan. And this is something I begrudgingly say because I don't love rooting for Michigan. I still won't root for Michigan. I love Villanova. I love Colin Gillespie. I love Justin Moore. Jay Wright is obviously a fantastic coach. He's kind of that next upper echelon of coaches in college basketball. But the way that Juwan Howard has the Wolverines playing right now, with Hunter Dickinson scoring 18 points per game, like a double-double per game. Eli Brooks is playing really well. He's got them playing extremely hard. They're battle-tested. They're more battle-tested than you might think. They've managed to come back from big deficits already in this tournament to win games. So this is kind of a team that just is continuing to brim with more and more confidence. And I would not be surprised if Michigan knocks off number 2 seed Villanova. And to be honest, I'm not rooting for it. I have Villanova winning, but I had them winning not against Michigan. I had them edging out Tennessee. Now that it's Michigan, I could see that being a potential upset. I really, really could. That's all the time that I got for today. Unfortunately, I don't have any Malkin's moments for you. I apologize. I will get Malkin's moments for you first thing next week. But thank you so much for joining me every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe, J-O, with Jonah Malkin on YouTube, JMalk97 on Instagram, at morning_Joe or at Jonah_Malkin on Twitter, Jonah Malkin on TikTok. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.